Hello, I'm Llewellyn King, the host of White House Chronicle. Welcome to the broadcast and thanks for coming along. You're in for a special treat today. I'm talking with Peter Zeihan, a geopolitical strategist and a very interesting man. We recorded this at a conference in Chatham, Massachusetts, convened by Burns and McDonnell, the engineering, construction, and architecture firm based in Kansas City, Missouri. Peter had just finished an eye-popping address on the future of everything. I was in the audience, and we sat down and talked after it about what he had to say. I thank Burns and McDonnell for the opportunity to do this. You've got certain large ideas that you've laid out, one of which is that China is in danger of immediate collapse or will collapse fairly soon, economically, politically, and socially, that we are going to have a biting labor shortage in the United States, that we need to collaborate far more with Mexico, that Mexico is a great resource to the United States, and that we have to do something about the Mexican infrastructure and get beyond the northern border into the hinterland of Mexico, which is still really underdeveloped, and the people are not liberated from traditional ways yet, not quite ready for industrialized society, and that we probably will have a ghastly chip shortage, which will prevent, say, the acceleration of artificial intelligence, etc. Of those ideas, which one? Oh, and also that Joe Biden will win the next election. Of those stimulating ideas, of these thought-provoking ideas, which one do you adhere to the most vehemently?
Well, a lot of these are interconnected, especially when you look at the demographic side of things. So very, very, very short version. We all used to live on farms, and for most of the world it was up like that until 1950. But with globalization, we all started taking industrial jobs and moving into towns. And when you live on farms, you have as many kids as you can, plus one. That's how you find out it's too many. But when you move into town, kids are no longer free labor. They're an expense. And you have fewer and fewer and fewer of them. You play that forward 75 years, and we've got population shortages in large parts of the world, up to and including here and in Germany and in China. And when the economic structure transforms to match the demographic structure, everything else has to change with it. So in the case of the Chinese, they're no longer the low-cost producer. In the case of the Germans, they're not going to be able to maintain their industrial output. And you break down those systems, and we have no choice but to look in China in a new light. And all of a sudden, Mexico is far more important than it has been.
You've got fairly different situations. The worst population contraction is in Japan. Where
Not anymore.
No, whereas it was.
The Japanese are still the world's oldest society, age-wise, but they have been able to take baby steps for the last 30 years to slow down the decay, and now Thailand and Germany and Italy and Poland and China and Korea and Taiwan are all aging faster.
During, if you'll accept this is my premise, and argue with me if you have the temerity, my premise is that artificial intelligence will have an effect quite different from the one of the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution produced an industrial society that made things and needed more people to make more things, and more people consume more things, and we got to where we are today. Now we have artificial intelligence, but it doesn't come at a time when we're an industrialized society. It comes at a time when we are a service economy, and it looks like it will wipe out service jobs. I've been doing this intensive amount of reporting on this to all sorts of people who might know. Nobody knows everything, besides yourself, of course. Indubitably. What do you say to that? That in fact we won't have a labor shortage, we're going to have too many people out of work, particularly in the lower tier of the employment structure?
Well, I'd say a couple of things that I have a problem with there. Number one, if China and Germany go the direction I'm expecting, then that's a lot of industrial plant, a lot of manufacturing that creates stuff that is going to go away. And we're going to have to build it ourselves if we still want things, especially in the electronics and computing space. So the proportion of workers in the United States that are in services is going to have to shrink in order to grow these other sectors. Second, the balance of production and consumption is what defines economic health and structure. And even if AI does everything we hope it will do, that's only on the production side of things. You still need consumers, and that means you still need people who are under age 40 to do the consuming.
But those people need incomes. You can't consume. You talk about Mexico. I can take you to parts of Mexico where people are not consuming, not even have a home or food, because they're not going to go out and substitute for middle-class Americans buying everything they can get on their credit cards.
The partial solution for that is infrastructure so they can participate in a more industrialized society. We've certainly seen that work very well in the north of the country.
Because we put in factories, industrialized.
Well, by we, you mean us and the Mexicans together? Yes.
Okay, absolutely. No, it's obviously collaborative. We didn't go there as an imperial power and say we're going to make our cars here, or many things I know that are made in Mexico that people, for example, turbines are made there and all sorts of interesting things. But nonetheless, we're going to have probably, or at least according to my expectations, a surplus of people who do simple work, but not artisans, the people who are actually under artisans, the entry-level jobs, catering, hotel work, this sort of thing. And farming has already been largely automated.
True.
And in a speech, you said that you couldn't pick fruit, tropical fruit, with machines, but you can with AI and sensors. In fact, they gently take that avocado off and put it in the box.
They are working on that, and it really depends upon what the crop is. So probably, assuming the current pace of technological advance holds, big if, we'll be able to do a lot of apples within the next 5 years, but things like mangoes and avocados and cherries are much
I think mangoes were what you mentioned. I talk to people in the AI space. Now, people who are doing something love it. Remember, in anything, people who are building automobiles tend to think that the future is automobiles and likewise, and people in the AI space think that AI is fabulous. Some of them have very large doubts about something we'll get to in a moment, which is the veracity of stuff. But I don't think that's going to not happen. What you need is energy, and as you very correctly said, you need the chips, and we're chip deficient. And according to what I heard from you, and I thought it was very insightful, we're going to have a terrible shortage, a crisis in the high end of chips, which do AI, but do a lot of other things. Explain for our viewers the chip shortage.
All manufacturing processes have multiple steps in order to make it happen. And the final product that comes out of the assembly line is only one step of that process. You have to build things that build the facilities that build the end product. And in the case of the high-end chips, 10 nanometer and smaller, there are 9,000 steps just to get the facility online. And the majority of those steps are 4,500 companies that only produce one product for one customer. And they're spread out around the world with a heavy emphasis on North America and Europe. So if one country, for whatever reason, kind of falls out of that constellation, we lose the ability to attempt to be able to make the chips, because these companies have been specializing on this for decades. It's globalization in physical form, and a lot of them only have a staff of 50 or less, and they're the only people on the planet who know how to do that one thing. So if something happens to, say, Germany, which with its demographics suggests that something's going to happen very hard to Germany, we lose the lenses that are necessary in the lithography. And we will have to rebuild that environment somewhere else with a more stable labor pool and the adequate capital and labor supply. That can't be done in 6 months. That's a 2 to 10 year process. And the more steps that we lose, the longer they're going to be out of whack. So when I look at artificial intelligence, when I look at the iPhone, when I look at satellite communications, when I look at the smart grid or EVs, everyone needs the same quality of chip in order to do these things at scale. But if we lose 80% of the chips, we lose 80% of those applications. And will AI be the one that ultimately rises to the top and we collectively decide as a society this is what we absolutely have to have? Maybe we will. Or maybe it has to be server farms.
Won't it be somewhat entrenched already by that time? We've already seen, as a professor at Berkeley said to me when I interviewed him, the people in immediate danger of transformative effects of AI are words in, words out people. He said language in, language out, which is affecting lawyers. The horror stories about a lawyer in New York.
We're all broken up about that.
Yeah. No, we're not. Journalists, already we're in powerless shape because of how the internet has destroyed traditional models of publishing. But now we don't know what's true. Not only do we not know whether it was written by a machine, but whether the material that the machine was working with was true. And it seems to me that we're a small industry in verification, in establishing the provenance of information.
Well, media is a different category, and it's definitely wrapped up in the whole technological discussion. It used to be, if you go back to the 80s and before, is that every newspaper, even relatively small ones, would have multiple offices around the world where you would have copy editors and journalists and writers and the rest.
I was there.
And there were multiple eyes on every piece that was produced, so there were lots of places to do kind of a check to make sure it passed the smell test. But as the technology advanced and we got faxes, and then email, and then attachments, and now algorithms and AI, the number of people that were in use steadily shrank, especially away from the mothership.
But the main thing was there was suddenly the advertising flowed away.
Absolutely.
And the revenue was not there. The model in the 80s and 90s and into the 2000s, publishing had a huge return on equity. It was one of the most profitable things you could do. And then it collapsed.
Because it digitized.
It collapsed because the advertisers didn't have to pay for the paper and the ink and printing. They could go straight, and they could identify the customer and be much more targeted.
Right. And we went from broadcasting to narrowcasting, and lots of people with lots of eyes looking at every piece to very few people. And as a result, a lot of our reporting just turned into opinion instead of fact.
Peter, what do you think the United States will look like in 10 years?
The industrial plant of the country will be over twice the size it is now. The amount of blue-collar workers will probably be triple the size it is now. And I expect the integration with Mexico to be spectacular, and Mexico will be the fastest growing economy in the world. They're already our number one partner demographically with immigration and economic interconnections and border crossings, legal border crossings. We are nearing already the stage of a NAFTA 3 to more tightly integrate the North American space. The question in my mind isn't what the United States or North America is going to look like. That's pretty clear to me. So what's every place else going to look like? Because we're looking at a demographic collapse on a scale we have never seen in human history right now.
But we're also looking at a time when the world population is greater than it has ever been, 10 billion.
Not for much longer.
But unfortunately, the people are in the wrong place, and they're trying to move. All the people in Africa would like to be in Europe, and an awful lot of people in Latin America would like to be in the US, and they're trying to get across the southern border even as we talk. It does seem to me that maybe we could use some of those people to make up for this deficiency in labor.
In times gone by, the United States has had an outward-looking immigration program, and that has served us very well. It doesn't come for free. There's some cultural quirks that come with that people are nervous about. We've done this before. The problem is that we're going to have to really reach out if we want to do that. So Mexico began the industrialization process 35 years ago, which means the birth rate in the last 35 years has dropped by more than half. So net migration from Mexico to the United States has now been flat to negative for almost 15 years. And the Central Americans are aging faster, just from a little later starting point. And so within 5 years, net migration from Central America will probably flatline as well.
For the benefit of our listeners on Sirius XM Radio's POTUS channel 124, you're listening to White House Chronicle. I'm Llewellyn King, executive producer and host. My guest is geopolitical strategist Peter Zeihan. Our conversation took place during a conference in Chatham, Massachusetts, convened by Burns and McDonnell, the engineering, construction, and architecture firm. White House Chronicle airs nationwide on PBS and public educational and government access channels, and worldwide on Voice of America, television and radio in English. Subscribe for full episodes of White House Chronicle each week as a podcast on Apple, Stitcher, or your favorite audio platform. Watch this and previous episodes on the White House Chronicle website, whchronicle.com. If you would like to receive my weekly columns, just email me at llewellynking1@gmail.com. And do remember, Llewellyn has 4 L's.
What about the impact, Peter, of India on this? It has a population that has swelled to 1.4 billion. They are talented people. They make incredibly good engineers and technologists. And India has the largest diaspora of any country. And many of them come here, hundreds of thousands of Indians playing I think 3 of our largest tech companies have Indians as president or chairman. I mean, this is an enormous resource, and there's no attempt to stay at home. The Indians have not fought the brain drain that I'm aware of. This is a resource which can compensate for a lot. It will somewhat change the dynamics of America, but so will any closer relationship with the population dynamics will change, but so will any closer relationship with Mexico. So I wonder how you feel about that.
Well, let's start with the good news. India is going to be fine. In a post-China world, they're going to have to do the same thing that we're going to have to do. They're going to have to increase their industrial plant to build their own stuff. They have the capacity to do that. You could argue that their labor force is more differentiated. They can be good at multiple things at the same time, whereas we usually just do the design and the high end. And so they can probably do it with a lot less stress. But they have no partners. They don't border a country that they like or that likes them. And then they're ringed by a series of mountains and deserts and jungles. So they can't really integrate with anyone. India is India. It's an Indian story. It's not a regional story. It's not a global story. That doesn't make it bad. It just makes them alone. The question then, of course, is whether or not the flow will continue. It doesn't take a lot of international connections to get a steady trickle of skilled Indians going to the rest of the world. And if I'm right about the general global breakdown that's in front of us, they're going to be the top 0.1% of Indians, which is still 1.5 million people, that are going to try to find greener pastures somewhere else with a higher standard of living. The question is, will New Delhi ever do anything to stop that? Doesn't seem to be part of the program at the moment.
The history of America is huge adaptation to crisis. We solved the gas crisis with fracking or advanced fracking. We solved the natural rubber crisis with artificial rubber. We've done this in the Second World War. We built ships at an incredible rate, aircraft as well. I mean, we're very good at responding to crisis. And often it seems as though we need crisis in order to get something done.
It's definitely motivating.
What are the chances of the crises that you laid out stimulating something else? Greater automation, i.e. artificial intelligence at work, which it is in a lot of things people don't realize. It didn't arrive this year. It just made itself heard this year. We're an innovative people, and so are the Brits for that matter. Look at what they created in the Second World War. Incredible things to help win the war, technological things, from tanks with hammers in the front beating the ground to get rid of the landmines. Where does innovation fit into, and how does it undermine your argument?
I think we are going to have exactly that sort of burst of innovation, but a few things to keep in mind. Number one, birth rates in the advanced world, including the US, have been dropping for decades. We have fewer people to do it with. For the last 30 years, we've become used to capital being abundant and cheap because the baby boomers were in their advanced adulthood, but they hadn't retired yet. They were the richest they'd ever been. Half of them are now retired, so capital costs are higher. The Chinese have expanded their industrial plant to make all the stuff we need. We're gonna have to rebuild that, competing for the access to the capital and the labor. And then finally, even if everything that you say goes down, and I think it will, you don't do it in a day. Just building the industrial plant is a 5-year process, minimum. And developing the new technologies to allow us to do these things better and with less money and less labor first requires some of that labor and some of that money. So we're trying to do, to be perfectly blunt, too many things at the same time. We'll get there, but it's not going to be as fast as it needs to be to avoid the disruptions.
But part of the magic of America is we do a lot of things at the same time. One of the things I find perpetually stimulating about the US is that there's so much going on. I remember when I arrived in this country, I wrote to a friend in England and said, this is a fabulous place. You can do well here if you just do one thing well, like making beads. And that's still true. The other advantage we have over many countries, not all of them, but many, is that we have mobility of labor, which may be slowed down by the healthcare system as people cling to jobs because of benefits, but enormous people are leaving California now for Texas. Mobility of labor. In Britain, when I lived in Britain, you couldn't get people moved from Liverpool to Manchester. It's next door. It's all, so that's one of our great advantages. The immigrant population, but you need to keep refreshing it to keep this dynamic going, which is that immigrants have no legacy. They're not bound down by social norms. They're not held back by what will people think, etc. And that's been a very powerful part. And there's been different immigrants over time. In the 19th century, there were various parts of Europe. 20th century, we've seen people from elsewhere in the world, including India, which I think is a very important dynamic, and Mexico. Can't we do all these things? We have such resources that we can offer the world. And if we're short of labor, print 1 million, 10 million, 20 million green cards and go anywhere in the world and people will volunteer to come here immediately.
We can, we will, it's just going to take a few years. And in that time, the rest of the world is going to slide. As for the green cards, that's a political question. And we go through phases in the United States where we're open and in phases when we're closed. We're clearly in a closed one right now. And what we're doing is we're kind of waiting for organized labor to figure out where they're going to fall. One of the many impacts of the Trump administration is that Donald Trump was able to lure union voters away from the Democratic Party, which they had been part of since our last party reshuffle. And they're basically swing voters right now. And the issue that they're most passionate about is immigration, because they see it as competing for their jobs. So neither the Democrats nor the Republicans want to do anything with immigration at the moment until such time as they know where unions are going to land on the political spectrum. That's not going to happen in the next 2 years, most likely.
That's very interesting. I have to declare, as a matter of truth, that I was president of the Washington-Baltimore Newspaper Guild and had some strikes around Washington, including the Baltimore Sun and the Associated Press. But the thing that bothers me about unions, and really does bother me, is that they're stuck, at least in the 1930s and maybe further back, that they have this bosses and workers thing, nothing like the German sense that we're all in this together. Mm-hmm. And the country, it seems to me, workers are crying out for some kind of representation, but not the old industrial revolution representation with strikes and strong arm and indifference to the economic reality.
Which it's very American.
Very American, but it doesn't work anymore, a more flexible. But I've tried to talk to the unions about this, and it's not been rewarding. So much so that I think we have to let these unions die and let new ones come up.
Well, that's probably not going to happen, because in the last 20 years, you've absolutely been right. We've seen union membership declining because the economic model had moved on. But if we're going to build out a massive industrial plant, those are almost entirely blue-collar jobs. So we need more blue-collar workers than we have right now, and that gives the unions the opportunity of a lifetime in terms of establishing a higher degree of political power. They're not going anywhere.
No, I agree with that. I do think that we have a crying need for artisans, for people who can fix things, paint things, build things.
I'm big on the fix.
Yeah, I'm big on the fix too, because I'm totally incompetent. And we don't have them. I've done some work with writing about and broadcasting about an organization at a very small college in South Carolina that was established after a hurricane, because they couldn't find anybody to rebuild Charleston. And there in Charleston is the American College of the Building Arts, a fairly rigorous liberal arts college plus a trade. Mm-hmm. And it's an extraordinary place. I hope maybe even you and I could go down there together, because it's an extraordinary...
I've been.
Oh, you have?
I have.
Okay, well, you tell the story.
Yeah. Well, it's part of the culture of the entire area. So a couple of decades ago, Charleston realized that there was a hunger in a lot of Europe to get access to the American market, because the United States system had a positive demography, a lot of young people doing consumption, and the European system didn't. So Charleston established itself as an industrial park, basically. And in sponsorship with colleges like that and the state government, they were able to build a program where they would find out from a potential foreign investor what the specific skill set that they needed to build out in the workforce in order to make the investment. And then they would train 3-4 times as many people in that skill set, and then allow the foreign investor to interview the students, and anyone that they would hire, the state would get a fee, and the rest would just be released into the workforce. And in doing so, Charleston became the #1 city in the United States for inward foreign direct investment. It's been a very successful model.
I know people who moved to Charleston, except it may wash away because it's very low.
There are problems.
There's a lot of sea level rise.
It's a great story, Charleston, every aspect of it. But on the flip side, you've got a place like Austin, Texas, which is at the heart of the Texas Triangle manufacturing hub, but everyone's all about tech all the time. So it's all about the coding. And they forgot that you need a lot of those bones in order to make a city successful. So yes, they've gotten good at tech operationalization and manufacturing and taking ideas and putting them into practice, but they've ran out of plumbers and carpenters. And so it has some of the greatest labor inflation in the country and has for years. Charleston doesn't have that problem.
That's our show for today. Thank you for being along. Pretty hearty meal when one talks to Peter, don't you think? Cheers.